Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final episode in a special three-part series on Miami Tech in the early days. The first America's Venture Capital Conference, the AVCC, held in October 2010, was an inflection point for Miami Tech. Less than a year after the AVCC, the Knight Foundation was seeding tech initiatives throughout Miami with millions of dollars of support. The Knight Foundation's efforts were led by its Miami program director, Matt Haggman, who launched the foundation's initiative aimed at connecting and propelling Miami's emerging entrepreneurs and startups as a way of building a community of entrepreneurs and startups. At the same time, Nancy Dahlberg began her tireless reporting at the Miami Herald about everything going on in the emerging Miami tech scene. Her column, very well read, The Starting Gate, is a must-read for anyone interested in technology in Southern Florida. Nancy also coordinated a Miami Herald Business Plan Challenge, an annual contest for entrepreneurs in South Florida. In this podcast, we share a lovely conversation about characters and motivations behind Miami Tech in its growing years.
Matt, Nancy, thanks so much for joining.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
This is awesome. I mean, thankfully, it wasn't the first time I saw you guys or certainly not the last at the AVCC. But there at the America's Venture Capital Conference, it was really such an eye-opening experience for me about what was possible here in Miami. And I remember being there at FIU's campus and just seeing incredible things going on, like Open English, meeting with Flybridge, which turned out to be their first investor. And, then Open English became, along with .co, which now Building.co, sort of two of the early successes in the tech community. Mm-hmm. I know, Nancy, you were covering the AVCC for the Miami Herald. Was that a surprise to you? I mean, what was your recollection of that?
Yeah, it was kind of eye-opening for me too. I mean, it was a great conference. It brought together all these people from in and outside the ecosystem for the first time, I think. I had been covering the tech community for a couple years on and off, but I think that was one of the, turning points for me that, there's something here.
No, it's amazing. Even looking back, I posted on Twitter a few weeks ago when I got inspired to do this sort of three-part miniseries, looking at the speaker list. It was amazing. Marcelo Claude, SoftBank,
wow.
Running a $5-10 billion fund for LATAM here from Miami. And, he was a speaker at that conference, along with, Manny Medina and, people from FedEx and, all these people who, and FedEx has obviously been a big supporter of the tech scene. So, Matt, I mean, that was right. Remind me exactly
So fall of 2011 is when I left the Miami Herald, where Nancy and I worked together.
Yeah.
Moved to Knight Foundation without any idea what I was going to do at the foundation. My role was Miami program director. And it was a really, really interesting time because, I walk in the door and Alberto says...
Literally, you walk in the door. The AVCC had happened, I think, in November that same year. So literally right at the same time. Yeah.
Same
amazing.
Time. And Alberto says to me, go talk to people for 4 months and come back and tell me what we should do next in the family.
Wow.
Right? And so it was this really interesting moment to think about a place. And also the one instruction I was given is it has to be one thing, right? You can't sort of pick a couple things to do. You have to pick one and focus on that one.
Amazing.
And so, started talking to people and thinking about sort of what's that thing and looking around, saw, at the time there was lots of talk about brain drain. And so was thinking about what can we do something to solve for that? And so all of this entrepreneurial, a place that's highly entrepreneurial, but seemed very fragmented And, it was a place where the feeling was if you wanted to scale a venture, that you had to move.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I thought, if we could use foundation resources towards building an ecosystem that solved for that focused on helping entrepreneurs scale ventures here, that could result in more people staying here. And
Right.
you would solve for this problem around brain drain, along with expanding opportunity across the community. And it felt like this was this moment where it was Miami was ready for its next thing, right? I mean, we've already gone through this period where such an arts renaissance had gripped the city, and it felt like entrepreneurship building on that, and particularly on building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, felt like that next thing. Now, at the time, there was no, when I was going around talking to folks about, what do you think should be that next thing? Entrepreneurship, particularly within foundation circles, was not something that was talked about a lot for a focus for a foundation.
No, that was amazing. And so, Nancy, there at the Herald, you said you had been covering sort of some tech initiatives off and on. My guess is that you had a little pushback. So, how was that conversation?
Well, I guess for a couple of years before that, off and on, trying to get any kind of stories that I could get permission to write. But yeah, it was kind of a small part of my job. I was at the time an editor. And then I just kept kind of pushing more and more of my job in that way. So yeah, it was a little bit of pushback in the beginning, but I think by around 2012, 2013, they were pretty all in on it.
And so for both of you, was there, after the AVCC, was there something that either was happening or not happening was there something that was happening that you began to say, okay, here's a little bit of some initiatives where, I need to, because obviously, you need to build off of something. I mean, the Knight Foundation supports initiatives, doesn't, build them itself. And so, yeah, was there something that was going on, be it refresh, something that sort of, let you say that, okay, there's a critical mass here. There's something we can build on.
Do you want
Yeah, either one, both of you.
Yeah, so the feeling was, someone had sent me when I was sort of going on this walkabout around the community. Sent me a blog post by Paul Graham. That is, that was called "How to Be Silicon Valley" from 2006.
Wow.
And here we are in 2000, the beginning. Now we entered the beginning of 2012. And in the post, he said Miami will never be a successful startup community.
Wow.
And I was really struck by, he said, though, to be successful, you need three things. You need a city that's urbanizing. You need a city with a strong university foundation base of
right.
And you need a place that's culturally alive. And I thought to myself, well, in 2006, maybe there was less of a case to be made. But sitting there in 2012, I thought, well, Miami's urbanizing. We think about how urban.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Right? Completely changed. We already talked about the cultural renaissance the city's been going through. And I remember reading One Community, One Goal to come out with a report at that time saying that now that Miami was top 10 per capita for college students in the metropolitan area. So I thought to myself, we check all three of these boxes that Paul Graham has laid out. And
that's amazing. So he wrote an article basically saying Miami wasn't ready. And here it was 5 years later, 6 years later. And you said, well, we've graduated. We are ready.
That's it. And so began toying with this idea. And it was during that time that sat down with the person who's then the business consultant at Knight Foundation, who worked with all the different program directors to help them think through what they're focused on. And that was a guy who you both know well, Ben Wers.
Wow.
Hey, Ben, look, I'm thinking about this thing. I mean, we were in totally separate departments at Knight Foundation, and said, think about this thing around entrepreneurship. And he said, yeah, dude, that can work. And so what we did, we did 3 experiments to test it in the spring of 2012. One, I think you were there. Ashoka had a concert.
Oh yeah, I sure do.
And I remember meeting Marco there for the first time, for example, and hearing Peter Kellner's name for the first time.
Here, let me actually, that's sort of what,
yeah.
Let me pause there. What was cool, and Nancy, I don't know if you covered that event, but what was very cool about that event was Endeavor had done one or two events in Miami, ISPs, International Selection Panels, but basically people parachuted in, and other than me and maybe like one other person from Miami, they parachuted in and they left, and they didn't really connect with the local community. And I remember that Ashoka event. And what for me was great about it was the amount of local faces.
Yeah.
And, it was an international event, but really with a strong, authentic Miami feeling. Nancy, did you cover that? What do you remember?
I remember that too. The same, just that there were a lot of local people as well.
Yeah.
And so we did that. We funded Geeks on a Plane. Remember that?
Yes.
Yes, in the bar.
Yes, in the bar. So, we Brian Breslin and Susan Mott went on. It was Geeks on a Plane to Latin America.
So talk about what Geeks on a Plane was.
Well, so this was 500 startups, and their ongoing work to try and connect with ecosystems around the world. And so in thinking about, and Ben's the one who suggested this, and thinking about 3 things that we could fund just to test out, to see.
Right. Just not a lot of money, but
And we thought, well, this is an opportunity to connect with, a globally known organization in their work about expanding around the world, particularly Latin America, one of our huge advantages in Miami. And to be able to engage with people in the ecosystem as we were finding it back in 2012. And so I remember just going. Remember we were at Novecento.
Yes.
And, it was electric. The energy, the conversations, the sense of possibility. And so we did that. And then the third thing is we funded a panel discussion.
Miami Finance Forum. I remember that.
I love it.
At the Bankers Club. Remember that?
Yes.
Oh my
God.
Discussion to try again, to sort of see what was going on.
Right.
In fact, no one left.
And who were the speakers? Walk me through that event, because I missed it. But Nancy, you seem to remember it.
Oh God, I can't remember who the speakers were, to be honest with you.
Do you remember what the focus was, Matt or Nancy?
On Miami as a startup community, basically.
And so what had happened is Ben and I had gone to Miami Finance Forum. We said, we will fund a gathering, but we want it to be about Miami's potential as a startup community. Just so we And I remember no one left. And then at the end of it, Nancy walked up to me and said, "So what are you up to at Knight Foundation?" And I said, "Well, we're trying to figure it out." And she said, "Well, when you're ready to share, let me know." And so in July 2012.
One sec, before you get there. So you did these 3 experiments, and then at the night, this, as you said, this was sort of a crazy idea in the best sense of the word. Linda Rottenberg, the founder of Endeavor, wrote a book, crazy, whatever, crazy entrepreneur,
crazy something. Compliment.
Yeah, crazy as a compliment. And I mean this as a compliment. But as you said, no one in the foundation world was thinking about using, the support of innovation and entrepreneurship as, sort of a community goal. So was after you did those 3 little sort of tests, was there a lot of pushback at the night? Did Alberto sort of embrace it? How did that go?
It took some explaining.
I bet.
We needed some conversations. Alberto's amazing in that, he's so open-minded and loves to hear new ideas. But at the same time, he wanted to understand why this was worth the time and effort of Knight Foundation. I remember him saying to me once, "What, you think you can change an economy?" I know. And so it suddenly is like, but Travian Shorter, who was my boss, who was in charge of all the program directors, who now has founded Be Me, which he runs today. The moment suggesting it, he said, "I love it. Let's do it." Dennis Scholl, who was then running the arts program at Knight Foundation, I remember he gave me some advice when I was thinking through what to do. And he said, you have to own something. You have to, when you walk into a room, you want people to know that you're about that, whatever that is. And so you need to be really, really clear. And if you can boil it down to a word, even better. And so when I went to him saying entrepreneurship, he said, I love it. And it was funny. It was at that point, it was a guy named Alex Stantroff who had sent me the Paul Graham article. Right. And Dennis Scholl says to me, well, because the moment was coming actually to make this pitch to Alberto to say, here's what I want to do. Right. And Dennis said, you should go meet this person for breakfast named Melissa Krinsman. Wow. And so Melissa and I met the day before I was going in to pitch the idea to Alberto for breakfast at Green Streets in Coconut Grove. And so, is there a there? And please tell me if there's not, because I'm about to go pitch this. And amazing. He said, no, I think there is. I left, I was in New York, and now, I'm spending more time in Miami. And I think there is. And so that sort of, I can tell you at that time, having those boosts of confidence of people saying, yes, do it. Or in this case, Melissa saying, yes, do it. Or Alex sending the Paul Graham article and saying, this is, yes, there's something there. That made such a difference. Because at the time, like within Knight, there was no internal push to do this. It would very easily could have gone in another direction. And in fact, when I first sat down with Alberto, I remember suggesting a couple things. And wow. No. It has to be one. So invaluable. And so you said that once you sort of got the green light, and by the way, on behalf of everyone, thank you. Yes, because the history of Miami would be very different if it hadn't been. It's been so much for your leadership. Yeah. Absolutely. But then, so what happened? You gave Nancy the exclusive? Okay, Nancy a call. We went and we met for breakfast. You remember that, Nancy?
Yes, at the Daily.
At the Daily. Wow. And said, Nancy, here's what we're going to do, and broke it out. And so there is a story that ran the next day. Hold on, Nancy, what did you think about Matt's idea? Did you think this is crazy, or what? I mean, what was your...
No, I didn't think it was crazy at all, because I did like he is seeing, I was seeing the building blocks starting to already come together. Right. It seemed like it was a logical, crazy idea.
Next step. Yeah, logical.
And that you needed something like that to kind of get that, push off that next step.
And so you guys make the announcement, and then you guys began, moving very deliberately, but rather fast, supporting different initiatives. Nancy, so the announcement was Nancy's article. So Nancy made the announcement with her story, which ran in July of that year, 2012. And so our initial thought was to really focus on, it felt like there were a lot of things going on. But like in lots of young ecosystems, it was really disconnected. Right. So the thinking was around doing two things. And I remember Brad Feld he had come through town earlier this year.
I remember that too.
And he had said, you should over-event, was what he said. Right.
Well, we do that well.
We're good at that. The other thing was that we need places. Right. Mm-hmm. We need places. And so, which is, of course, where you and I first met. Exactly. We started then, looking for places to do, to do what was then known as, and then became known as the Lab Miami. And I remember us looking at spaces in Wynwood. And I remember, I think it was a Saturday morning.
Yep.
We're looking at the space that is still to this day the home of the lab. And we walked into this dark enclosed space. There were no windows looking out onto the street, which became the Lab Miami. And I remember that's when you walked in. Yeah, Juan Pablo. And I'm like, hey, this amazing partnership that, was just so much fun.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember Brad Feld coming through town, and he just came back through town thanks to Nico Berardi 6 months ago or so. And he's actually one of my neighbors in Aspen. So,
Brad?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But the reason I mention it is that Brad made the point when he was in Miami in 2012, and I think it was Las Vegas was positioning itself a bit of a tech hub.
Well,
and his whole
Tony
point was,
Shea?
Tony Shea, and this whole idea of creating collision.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I remember early on saying to you, Matt, that the place where people were having collisions was at the Panther Coffee in Wynwood. Sort of, if you remember then, I don't know, Nancy, if you ever went and met entrepreneurs there, but it was like the place, in part because, Miami spread out and people began to realize they needed to see each other. They needed to, if you're living in Southwest Miami or in Hollywood, you're just feeling isolated. Where can you go and meet? And so, for a while, people were just meeting at that Panther Coffee. And so for us, when we thought about the lab, one, Wilfredo and Daniel and the other partners were already in Wynwood, in sort of a temporary space, but it was almost, okay, we needed to be, walking distance or skateboarding distance from Panther Coffee, because that's the only way we're going to get that authentic feel.
100%.
Yeah. And what do you remember, Nancy, as 2012, the Knight Foundation announced it, you run the exclusive. Did you notice a sort of uptick of activity, of interest? Within the paper, were they focused on, not just interesting stories, but what was piquing the public's interest?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of events like that they that piqued their interest. Yeah, for sure. One of them was that great debate thing we had.
Let's talk about that.
I remember telling her about it and inviting her, and she's like, "Oh, go have fun, whatever." And she just kind of let me do whatever I wanted to do. And then she heard from other people who were there in the business community, not just the startup community, about how interesting that was. And she's like, "Oh, that thing you did, there's something there. We should do more startup coverage."
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that was for me the most interesting thing. So at the time, I don't know, Matt or Nancy, what was your view? There were some great initiatives going on, but I felt that people were creating a sort of walled gardens. Yeah. And everyone was very concerned about proprietorship and not just being open. And so, one of the things that the lab, we did with the support of the Knight and Matt was, try to create a space where, people could literally, walk in, plug in and connect.
Yeah.
Connect, in every sense of the word. And so I wrote this op-ed piece for the Herald, which I'll link in the show notes. And I remember it was something like Miami Tech, start your engines. And I was sort of saying hey, we have this great opportunity. Let's connect and start working together. Mm-hmm. For me, not at all controversial. Austin Bunsen, who I did not know at the time, the original OG, the original gangster. Basically, this was when Facebook was a thing, just blows me up on Facebook. I start getting all these people telling me you're an a-hole. There's already a tech community here. Learn your place. We don't need you guys to, tell us what to do. And I remember I was so, it's actually great, with politics, when you find you think this is completely rational and, there's people who just think you're a madman. And so I just remember okay, I just can't keep getting blown up online. I gotta meet this guy in person, but somewhere where, somewhere he's not going to kill me. No, I'm kidding. But, I was okay, so we started off with this idea of, okay, let's debate it. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, there'll be like 10 people there. And I got Susan Amat to moderate it. And I still remember, because it's a typical thing, you invite and, who knows. And I remember when Nancy walked in, I was like, oh my God, this is for real. Then Adriana Cisneros, who was just thinking about moving back to Miami, comes. She shows up 5 minutes early and literally sits in the first row, hair pulled back, and she has a notepad. And I just remember thinking like, oh shit, I'm not prepared for this. She was like there to like take notes, decide who won or lost, and her multiplied by, 100, 150 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the fall of 2012.
Yeah.
Wow. I remember that. That room was packed.
We literally, we did it at Greenberg Traurig. They recently moved into these new offices, and I kept sort of, as people kept showing up, I kept changing the room. Thankfully, it was like at 6 p.m. So all the rooms were empty. And then we ended up moving into the largest room that is normally cut in half. And I got them to open up the screen, the divider in the room, so we could, sort of fit everyone. No, it's amazing. And I had obviously heard of Susan and the Launchpad, but I hadn't met her before then. And, it was the first time I began meeting people who were doing stuff in tech down here. And I began to realize that people were fairly siloed. I don't know if Matt, I mean, as you got into sort of, beyond the initiatives that the Knight was supporting, what did you think of what was going on sort of in the ecosystem and how it could be improved? And then I'm going to ask Nancy sort of the same thing.
Well, I mean, what my experience is that when we were providing opportunities for people to connect and to take initiative on things, they were doing it. So it was, so I felt like, yes, I think that moment about, the great debate, that was sort of a natural part of the evolution of an ecosystem taking its next big leap, because, that is gonna, when you see this focused energy coming in to something, it's natural that people are going to raise their hands and say, wait a second, what's going on? It just feels like that's sort of a natural part of growth. And, but what I found again and again is that, that for sure there's some exceptions to this, but by and large, I found again and again people who were energetic, extraordinarily thoughtful, who were eager to connect. I mean, for example, the spirit at the lab, when it opened, on Northwest 26th. I mean, of course, there was the, Weefy and Danny. They created that first iteration around the corner, and then, we closed that and then launched the lab. Where at Knight partnered with you and Marco at Echeverria, and the moment that I remember, even that first Saturday, remember when we opened? I think it was a February. Yeah. Why do I think February of 2013? Man, this is crazy. Yeah. Going back, memory.
It is memory lane.
Memory lane here. But the energy that day about just the eagerness and willingness to participate and share and engage. I mean, my thought was we just need to create more opportunities to do this and move as fast as we possibly can.
And what did you find, Nancy, as things began to sort of build? Who were you interested in talking to? What gave rise to the stories that you went after or people you talked to?
Well, the first story I ever wrote about startups was on the Launchpad, basically.
Wow.
So 2008. So I got to meet some of the entrepreneurs that were in the Launchpad, and of course Susan. And I remember Susan telling me, entrepreneurs, the great thing about Miami is the entrepreneurs are all hustlers. And I mean that in a good way. About that. And then I started looking around and, they're right. All the ones that I met there. So that was the very first story that I wrote. And then after that, there were I started discovering that there were meetups all over the place, and Refresh Miami, and there was quite a calendar in the early days. And so I started investigating some of those and found out about Incubate Miami and a lot of the other early endeavors, basically.
If I could just jump in real quick, I mean, Nancy, your reporting was pivotal.
Oh, yeah.
If the story is not being told, if the people and the ideas, the challenges, if those aren't being shared with the broader community, I don't think that there's nearly the success that we've seen. I mean, it's
and I mean, the problem, it was obviously a very authentic startup culture that, was there before I got involved or you got involved,
Yep.
Matt, and before Nancy was really covering it. But the problem it had was it was very disconnected.
Right.
So, it was great talking with Brian and Austin about what was going on, up in Broward. There was a meetup group called the White Table Foundation, WTF, I guess, whatever, these things I had not even heard about. And I'm sure there were lots of amazing things, but it was sort of everyone was doing their own thing. Right. Mm-hmm. And where I thought the Knight Foundation did an amazing job was, supporting people who wanted to be part of a community.
Yep.
And pushing initiatives to sort of leverage on what other people was doing. And then, that's where, it seemed to me it worked very well hand in hand with the kinds of things Nancy was reporting. Mm-hmm. So the people who were, sort of interested in playing together in, in the bigger sandbox with everyone, mm-hmm. Were the people who tended to get funding from the Knight, tended to get reporting from Nancy. So what I want to do is then, I think we all started and, we were, jump in. Yeah.
To underline what you're saying right there. Certainly from our perspective at Knight Foundation, the thinking was that for this to work, it has to be by, for, of, about entrepreneurs.
Right.
And so, it really begins and ends with the entrepreneur. That, when we were first launching, it wasn't as though we were calling, local elected leaders or people who are perceived as community leaders across Miami. It was built on a really specific focus on entrepreneurs, a ground up approach. And
right.
That was one of the key things at the outset. Doing that without that, and it struck Ben and I that in looking at other ecosystems that oftentimes they can be very top down, and it just
right.
we thought to ourselves, that's not durable. And what we, when an ecosystem, the theory was an ecosystem building done well is that if you take personalities out of it, that'll continually spiraling forward.
And so talking about that, and I could, check the dates, but in my mind, it's like we began working on these initiatives. There was, good traction, things were moving forward. And then there was this moment, this very odd moment where, and maybe it was, when Open English began raising a bunch of money and then building.co or .co got sold for, $110 million, that the world sort of, it's felt like overnight took notice of, what we were building or trying to build. And suddenly, where you had no expectations, for 10 years, where anything that, any people with a college or non-college degree getting together and talking about tech was like, oh my God, that's so amazing. And then these articles started coming out, not just in the Herald, but in USA Today and Forbes and Fortune and, all these, publications talking about the Miami tech scene.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if it happened to you all, it was almost like, the reality was growing, I don't know, linearly or exponentially, but it was growing at a healthy rate, but almost the hyperbole that was created in some of these articles, there was a disconnect where I was like, whoa, we need to, tap the brakes on the expectations here.
About that too.
Yeah.
Didn't you write a post about that? Tapping the brakes?
I did. I was like, let's tap the brakes. Because, it was funny because people would come here from Latin America and I'd bump it, and they'd be like, oh my God, like, I don't know what they thought, but they thought, oh, this would be amazing. This is a Spanish speaking Silicon Valley. And it's like, whoa. It's, we're getting there, but, give us 10 years, we're getting there to the 10-year mark. But yeah, what did you guys, what was your sense as, things began to move, in terms of expectations and, what do you think are some of the seminal moments there? Matt, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's, it's always, you need to thread the needle a little bit around, on the one hand, again, going back to Brett Felt, when he had said, be noisy.
Yeah.
You need to tell the story. And that's where Nancy's work is so incredibly important.
Incredible.
But at the same time, need to do it with an authentic voice. And that can be hard to sort of regulate that, because in the excitement of it all, it can get a little ahead of the reality. My thought was, is to be present and to be about the work and to move as fast as we possibly can. And that is to be continually engaging with people across the community, having those ongoing feedback loops, having ways in which you're there, right? You're sitting up in some office, but you're there meeting people where they are as we together are trying to think anew about our city and community, and how to build the startup ecosystem in Miami. The other thing was just trying to, the great privilege of working at night is the sort of things that you could do. For example, early on, over the course of my time there, when was it, 6+ years, we did, a little, more than 200 grants, about, a little short of $30 million in investments.
Wow.
Right? And so funded everything from, the launch of Emerge Americas and the Idea Center at Miami-Dade College, to the Babson Win Lab, to 500 startups, to
Endeavor,
and Venture for America. I remember cold calling Andrew Yang, who's now, famous after running for president, but at the time he had started Venture for America. Yeah. But one of the first, following the lab and making that initial grant with alongside your investment, Juan Pablo, to start the lab Miami on 26th, I'd been introduced to Peter Kellner through a friend named Bo Ferrari, who's now at NBC, and Bo had connected us, and we had coffee in what was then the Canyon Ranch, the lobby of the Canyon Ranch in Miami Beach, where he said, "Let me tell you about Endeavor." And I said, "Well, we're launching this thing around entrepreneurship at Knight Foundation, and trying to have to make good on this idea of actually doing it, right? Great stuff here." And so that led to my dates here. So December of 2012, the first large grant we did at Knight Foundation was a $2 million grant to bring Endeavor to Miami, which was their very first U.S. affiliate, and which was a big decision for Endeavor because they'd never done any work in the U.S. And that also I sort of viewed as having that sort of validation where Endeavor was ready to launch in Miami. To me, was a really important moment at a really early stage, evolution of the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, for me, you're right. It was that feedback loop where there was validation going on. And so, Nancy, going back to what I was sort of positing, that there was this moment where I sort of felt like, the national press began hyping the Miami tech ecosystem. You were there in the press. You had been, diligently covering what was going on. What was sort of the perception there at the Herald when, some of the national press began,
I think that the perception at the Herald was, okay, now you don't have to do as much.
That's amazing.
To be honest, but, it definitely was validation, and it definitely felt a little bit early. In 2015, it felt a little early. By 2016, I think you're right. It started to feel like things were coming together with the hype and
the reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that 2016 for me was a pivotal year as far as okay, this is, I always knew it was real, but this is, really showing a lot of traction now.
Yeah.
2016, you said.
I think so. Yeah, 2015 starting, but, definitely by 2016. I know that was a couple of years after Endeavor, and I think that Endeavor was a huge validator. And I think it took them a little while to, because they're only
Absolutely
a couple of them every year. But I think that kind of marked 2013 marked the focus on scale ups, not just startups here. Now you've got these larger companies, these, that have traction. So I think having Endeavor, picking several entrepreneurs every year, it just put the focus in the news on that. And then, we had Magic Leap, and we had Boat Setter and Nearpod, and all those, and Open English, and all those others making, headlines for their own news, not just the ecosystem,
It really is amazing to think of, like, during that stretch from, end of 2012 through 2016. I mean, have so many things from an ecosystem standpoint.
Right.
How many of these things that are still these pivotal pieces were started during that period?
Yeah.
Whether it's, and of course, and then the existing like Refresh in particular, scaled in a big, big way. But, in so many, that was such a formative period for the ecosystem, whether it was around convenings, whether it was around setting up more ways to help entrepreneurs solve their particular problems, Startup Bootcamp, Lab being 500 startups, all being examples of that. Obviously.
No, and at that time, I totally agree. There was some time in 2015, 16, where I realized, and this was the greatest thing ever, that I was no longer relevant to the conversation. It was almost like, for a long time, as you know, 2012, 13, 14, whenever anyone was going to do something, they'd come talk to Matt, they'd talk to me, they'd talk with Marco Chiverti, they'd talk with Silvina Moschini. There were just people that everyone would sort of talk to, and you sort of knew what everyone was thinking about doing. Or not everyone, but, a lot of people. And then, in 2015, 16, it just really began to be great that I'd hear about some great new initiative, through Nancy's, our reporting. It was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Or, I'd go to one of the Knight Foundation community board meetings.
Oh, community advisory board, yeah.
Right. Community advice. And I'd hear about like these great initiatives that were getting money. And I'm like, oh my God, I hadn't heard of Black Tech Week or, just these very cool stuff. And it felt like, the way I feel with my kids when, they grow up and they start having their plans and they don't include me in them. Though people.
That's an important point in the evolution.
Yeah.
I think for all of us, where we reach that point where things are happening, from different places. It's not top down. It's not from one central place. I mean, honestly, that was one of the, I remember Ben and I took one trip to visit an ecosystem, and we were so struck by how it seemed to be going through sort of one person, or there was even, and our thinking was, we want to avoid that and create an environment where everyone feels permission and enabled to do and to solve for whatever it is that they want to do and solve for, and no one's sort of looking around thinking, where's my lane? That they're just marching forward on whatever it is they want to do.
So galloping ahead, I mean, let's leave it, 2016. I don't want to say our work was done, but our child was growing up. Last year, again, thanks to Nancy's reporting, along with Refresh, she reported in early 2020 that the amount of dollars invested in venture capital and tech in South Florida was $2.3 billion, which is actually more than the $1.8 billion that was invested in all of Latin America in 2018.
Wow.
So, it really gives you a sense in Miami being considered today, in terms of dollars invested, the seventh most relevant, ecosystem in the United States, ahead of Austin, ahead of Chicago, and, some very established ecosystems. Where do you guys, where do you think the Miami tech ecosystem's evolving to? Where do you think, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where are we headed?
Sure. Nancy, do you want to go first?
Sure, I guess so. I think that we're still pretty diverse as far as the type of companies, but I think, we are seeing some groupings now evolving in health tech, right, and tech and fintech. So I think that's pretty exciting, and maybe even real estate tech. So I think that's really exciting. And I also think that the lab really started the whole co-working revolution here. And now we're number one in co-working. And how great is that for setting us up after the pandemic as a remote hub?
Right.
What if we could get all these people from Twitter, Facebook, you name it, who are now allowed to work anywhere, to come work at their companies, but here, and just adding to the whole ecosystem mix and more experience too.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I'm also very hopeful. Matt, what do you see as you look at it?
Sure. It's when I remember writing down some guiding principles that would follow in the work at Knight, and it was building a network from the bottom up, diversity as a core strength, entrepreneurs over institutions, funding experiments first, then scaling.
Wow.
Not reinventing if we can import, and then learning as we go. And as I think about where we are right now, I really go to diversity as our core strength. I mean, I think that and the work at Knight Foundation became very intentional about trying to build an ecosystem,
right,
of the entire community, and seeing that innovation is built on a diversity of people and ideas, connecting and colliding. And so the more people we include, the more innovative we'll be. And I think we in Miami, while the work has to be always, and it is always, about excellence and about scaling ventures that can have really outsized impact, that we have a unique opportunity when, across, when we see in ecosystems, across this country, the remarkable lack of diversity, whether it's race or gender, that Miami has a real opportunity to build on the work that's been done to really stand out. I mean, Steve Case, when he was here last year, that's one of the things that he highlighted. I think, Nancy, you quoted him as that this is one of the most diverse startup communities he's ever
seen. You said that, yes.
And that presents a real differentiator for us. And if we can leverage that, that presents enormous possibility to me going forward, or continue to leverage it. I think we have. I think we need to continue to press on the gas in a big way.
Well, guys, hey, it's been an amazing journey the last almost 10 years working with you guys together. I know that as I think about, leveraging, the community, I just, hope that you guys stay involved. It's been an absolute pleasure. And believe me, each of us owes each of the two of you a huge debt. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And to you.
Yeah, no, Mahalo, and to you. It's been so much fun to be on this adventure with you and with you, Nancy. And there's more to come.
Yep, the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye. Stay smiling.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG Law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.